The Challenger drifted silently through the inky black of space, a gleaming silver titan in a sea of stars. From its observation deck, the galaxy stretched out in every direction, a dazzling tapestry of light. Captain Alaric Jameson leaned against the railing, his eyes tracing the curves of the vast ship. For all its grandeur, it still felt like a cage to him, a luxury cage, perhaps, but one nonetheless. He had been aboard the Challenger for 6 months, representing humanity as part of the intergalactic diplomatic initiative. Earth's influence was spreading across the stars, but there were still far too many who viewed humans as little more than a blip in the grand cosmic scale. A species that had barely clawed its way out of its home planet's atmosphere, and now, apparently, had to prove itself worthy of intergalactic recognition. Alaric rubbed the brass buttons on his jacket absent-mindedly, feeling the weight of the metals pinned to his chest. Each one was a reminder of the battles fought, the wars won, and the survival of humanity against overwhelming odds. But these symbols of strength had never done much to change the perception of the galaxy's more advanced civilizations. The door to the conference room slid open, and he stepped inside. The room was filled with representatives from several species, each more alien than the last. Tall, insected beings with multiple arms, gelatinous entities that floated midair, and sleek, humanoid figures with shimmering scales. The one thing they all had in common was their unreadable expressions, as they watched Alaric take his seat. At the front of the room, a figure stood in dark robes, his face a blend of sharp angles and smooth skin. Professor Zrathak, the teacher of the interspecies diplomacy course. A member of the Grel'zok species, whose long lifespan and advanced intelligence had led them to dominate many of the surrounding galaxies. Zrathak was a creature of logic, dismissive of anything that didn't align with his view of intellectual superiority. Humanity's violent history was an embarrassment to him, and he made no effort to hide his disdain. "Ah, the human," Zrathak said, his voice a smooth, almost melodic hum, but with an unmistakable edge of condescension. "Please sit. We're discussing the history of war and survival today. You may find it enlightening." Alaric sat, his posture rigid. He had been prepared for this. Zrathak had made it clear, both publicly and privately, that humanity's past wars were something to be ashamed of. In his eyes, humans had never truly won a war, they had simply endured, stumbling through their own history like blind children in the dark. The professor began his lecture, outlining the various conflicts between alien species, focusing on the elegant ways of diplomacy, trade, and peace-building. Each word was meant to highlight the supposed sophistication of the Grel'zok and their peers. But then came the inevitable part. Zrathak's eyes flicked toward Alaric, and his voice took on a sharper, almost mocking tone. "Of course, the humans have their own history of war, don't they? It's interesting, isn't it? How you've been stuck in a perpetual state of conflict, never really winning a single one of your wars, only barely surviving." He let the words hang in the air, his gaze lingering on Alaric for a moment too long. The room fell silent. Every other delegate from the various alien species seemed to watch with bated breath, waiting for Alaric's reaction. They didn't need to say anything. Zrathak's words had already done the work for them. The unspoken consensus was clear: humanity, despite its cleverness, was still beneath the rest of the galaxy. Alaric clenched his jaw. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, the anger and frustration at being belittled yet again. But he couldn't show it. Not here, not now. Not in front of the galaxy's elite. Zrathak continued, "It's almost as if your species can't move beyond violence. Your wars, your conflicts, how quaint. You never win, you simply endure. And that, my friends, is the measure of humanity's success." The words felt like a slap. The worst part was that there was truth in them. Humanity had fought countless wars, some for survival, others for conquest, but none had truly won, in the way that Zrathak seemed to envision. Humanity's wars were brutal, messy, chaotic. But they had made it through, each generation learning from the last. Alaric exhaled slowly, forcing his emotions down. He'd been in worse situations. He had fought in worse battles. He had seen things no one should ever have to witness. And yet here he was, sitting quietly, holding back. The weight of the medals on his chest felt heavier now. The professor wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Tell me, Captain Jameson," Zrathak said with a gleam in his eye, "what victory does your species truly possess? What triumphs can you hold up to the rest of the galaxy?" Alaric's fingers tightened around the arms of his chair. The room seemed to close in on him, the silence thick with anticipation. Zrathak was pushing him, daring him to respond. But Alaric wasn't about to let his emotions take over. Not yet. "You want a victory, Professor?" Alaric said, his voice steady, though the edge of his words cut through the room like a blade. "We've won every battle we've fought. Not because we were the strongest, not because we had the most advanced technology, but because we never give up. We survive. And that's a victory in itself." Zrathak's expression remained impassive. "Survival is not victory, Captain. It is merely a state of existence." Alaric smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Maybe in your galaxy. But on Earth, we call it winning." A murmur passed through the room. Alaric could feel the weight of every eye on him. He wasn't just defending humanity's honor, he was fighting to keep humanity from being forgotten, from being reduced to nothing more than an afterthought in the eyes of the stars. Zrathak didn't respond immediately. He simply turned back to the class, his voice once again taking on a mocking tone as he shifted his focus. "As I was saying." But Alaric wasn't listening anymore. His mind was racing, his thoughts full of the battles he had fought, both on the ground and in the quiet moments of his life when the horrors of war still haunted him. But one thing was certain. Humanity might never be the strongest, the smartest, or the most advanced. But it would always be the ones who refused to be wiped out. The class continued, but for Alaric, the battle was just beginning. The following day, the conference room was filled with an unsettling silence, a tension that clung to the air like the scent of an approaching storm. Alaric Jameson sat at the far side of the room, his back straight and his mind sharper than ever. The Challenger-esque classroom was designed for interspecies diplomacy, but today it felt more like a battlefield than a learning environment. Professor Zrathak stood at the front, his tall, lean frame casting a long shadow against the holographic displays. The professor's eyes flicked toward Alaric as he spoke, his voice rich and smooth, like the hum of an ancient machine. "Today, we will explore the finer points of war," Zrathak began, his words slipping like polished steel. "The galaxy has seen many conflicts, some swift and decisive, others long and drawn out. Some species have fought with honor, others with brutality. The key to victory, however, is understanding the value of peace. War, my dear students, is a last resort." Alaric's eyes narrowed as he shifted in his seat, but he remained silent. He had heard Zrathak's speeches before, the dissection of humanity's history of conflict, always followed by some lofty proclamation of peace. The Grel'zok's philosophy had been hammered into his skull ever since the Challenger's initiation, and he had grown weary of it. But today felt different. Zrathak's words were a challenge, a sharp jab aimed at humanity's very core. The professor continued, a touch of mockery in his tone. "Let us begin with the most basic question: what does war bring? For your species, it has brought nothing but death, destruction, and despair." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Humanity, in its most primitive state, has fought countless wars, wars you never truly won, merely survived." Alaric felt his hands tighten around the edge of the chair. His chest tightened, the anger rising once more, but he controlled it. Zrathak's cruelty was calculated. This was no mere lesson. This was a direct assault on Alaric's identity as a human. A member of the Zerath, a large, tentacled species, raised a clawed hand. "But Professor," the creature's voice rumbled, "humans have survived. Isn't that an achievement in itself?" Zrathak gave a small, derisive smile. "Survival, my dear Zerath, is a natural instinct. It is not an achievement to be praised. To thrive, now that is something to commend." He turned back to Alaric, who was staring at him, his gaze burning. "Tell me, Captain Jameson, what triumph can you point to from your species' endless battles? Name one." The room fell into silence, all eyes on Alaric. His heart pounded. This was it. The moment when he had to confront the cold, harsh truth of Zrathak's words. He could feel the weight of his past pressing down on him, but he wasn't going to let the professor have the last word. Alaric took a breath, his voice steady, though it carried an undercurrent of barely controlled fury. "We fought to protect what mattered. We fought to survive." He stood, moving slowly toward the front of the room. "And we won. Not because we were the most advanced, not because we had the best weapons, but because we never gave up." Zrathak arched an eyebrow, his amusement evident. "You speak of survival as if it were a victory. A species that clings to life like a dying animal, hoping for a better future. How quaint." The human diplomat's face tightened, but he wasn't about to back down. He had lived through wars. He had seen friends die, witnessed the horrors of conflict, and yet he had endured. The human spirit wasn't just a product of survival. It was a force that had shaped the galaxy in ways even the Grel'zok couldn't comprehend. "We survived, yes. But we also grew," Alaric continued, his voice rising slightly. "We learned from every loss. Every war, every battle taught us something. How to be stronger, how to rebuild, how to forge alliances. You think we fight for glory? No. We fight to protect our future. And that's something you can't dismiss." Zrathak's expression soured. "Your wars are not worth celebrating, Captain. They are a stain on the galaxy's history. Humanity's so-called victories are nothing more than a series of desperate, bloody struggles." "Maybe to you they are," Alaric shot back. "But you don't understand what it's like to fight when the odds are stacked against you, when you know your people may not survive. You can sit in your ivory tower, talking about peace and diplomacy, but the truth is, peace doesn't always come through negotiation. Sometimes it comes through blood." The room was still. For a brief moment, Zrathak was silent, his cold eyes narrowing in thought. He had expected defiance, but not this kind of fire from a human. Alaric's words had cut deeper than he intended. His assumptions about humanity's weakness were starting to falter. A murmur rippled through the class, the other delegates shifting in their seats, clearly intrigued by the sudden shift in tone. The Zerath, who had earlier supported Zrathak, now looked at Alaric with newfound curiosity. "Tell us, Captain," the Zerath's voice rumbled again. "What lessons did you learn from these wars? What did humanity take from its struggles that makes you proud?" Alaric paused for a moment, his eyes flicking back to the medals on his uniform. "We learned resilience. We learned that no matter how many times we fall, we get back up. We learned that unity, even in the face of overwhelming odds, is our greatest strength." Zrathak's smile faded, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gestured to the holographic displays, which flickered to life, showing images of human battles, some iconic, some forgotten. The struggles that Alaric had lived through were now on display for the galaxy to see. The Battle of Europa. The Siege of Mars. The Defense of Earth. Each one a scar on humanity's history, but each one a testament to their unwavering will to survive. "Perhaps," Zrathak said, his tone now less mocking, "humanity's resilience is something worth considering. But it does not change the fact that your species has spent too much of its history in conflict." Alaric stood tall, his eyes locked with Zrathak's. "You call it conflict. We call it survival." The professor said nothing more. The class continued, but the tension lingered in the room, a quiet understanding beginning to settle among the delegates. Alaric had spoken not just for humanity, but for everyone who had fought for something greater than themselves. As the lecture drew to a close, Alaric's thoughts turned inward. This was only the beginning. Zrathak might have challenged humanity's legacy, but he hadn't broken it. And Alaric was determined to ensure the galaxy knew exactly what humanity was capable of, on their terms, not the professor's. The next session on the Challenger was unlike any Alaric had experienced before. As soon as he entered the conference room, the weight of Zrathak's gaze hit him like a physical force. The professor stood by the holographic display, his tall figure imposing, his eyes glinting with quiet amusement. The rest of the delegates, a mix of alien species, were already seated, murmuring among themselves. They had seen Alaric's fiery defense of humanity the day before, and now, they waited to see how he would handle what was sure to come next. Zrathak's tone was as smooth and calculating as ever. Today, we will continue our discussion on the human concept of victory. You see, Captain Jameson, your species clings to the idea that survival is a triumph, but that is simply not enough. Let us explore the true essence of victory. What does it truly mean to overcome a challenge? Alaric resisted the urge to roll his eyes. He knew exactly where this was heading. Zrathak had barely disguised his disdain for humanity's history of war, and now, the professor was trying to lead the class into another session of mocking humanity's supposed lack of real victory. Alaric could feel the tension building in his chest, but he wasn't about to let the professor off the hook this time. Not after yesterday. Zrathak turned to the class, addressing the group at large. Take, for example, the greatest conflicts of your species, their wars, their battles. They've never truly emerged victorious, have they? They merely endured. And yet, they cling to their survival as a mark of success. Alaric stood, his voice cutting through the professor's words. That's where you're wrong, Zrathak, he said, his tone calm but firm. You call it enduring. We call it winning. Zrathak's eyes flicked toward him, a thin smile playing on his lips. Oh? And how, pray tell, did humanity win these wars? By surviving or by something more? Enlighten us, Captain. Show us how humanity's endless conflicts were anything other than futile. The room fell into a hush. Alaric could feel every set of eyes on him, waiting, testing. They all expected him to back down, to offer some weak defense that would further solidify their view of humanity as primitive. He couldn't afford to disappoint them. Not now. Alaric's hand brushed over the medals pinned to his chest. The cold metal was a reminder of everything humanity had fought for, of the battles won and the lives lost. Each one represented more than just survival. They were the culmination of a long, hard fight, a fight that had shaped the very soul of humanity. He straightened, meeting Zrathak's gaze with steady confidence. We didn't just survive those wars, Zrathak. We built something. Each war, each battle, no matter how brutal, made us stronger. It taught us how to defend our homes, how to defend our people. It taught us the value of unity, of standing together against the odds. That's what you failed to understand. Victory isn't just about defeating an enemy, it's about what comes after. It's about building a future in the wake of destruction. Zrathak's smile faltered for just a moment, a flicker of doubt passing through his ancient eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. And yet, the professor said, his voice colder now, your species has never truly won a war in the way that matters. Every victory is followed by more conflict. You've only ever fought to survive, Captain. Your wars never end, do they? There is no peace for humanity. Only endless struggle. Alaric's pulse quickened. He had been prepared for this. Zrathak's words were a direct challenge to everything he stood for. But Alaric knew one thing for sure. Humanity didn't just fight for the sake of fighting. They fought because they had to. And when the dust settled, they rebuilt, stronger and more united. You're wrong, Alaric said, his voice rising with a controlled intensity. You're so focused on the concept of peace that you've forgotten what it really means to fight for something. We fought wars, yes. But each one was a stepping stone. A lesson in resilience and growth. We didn't fight for glory, we fought for our future. Every time we fell, we got back up. Every time we lost, we learned. And that's the difference between your perfect civilization and ours. We don't need to be perfect to win. We just need to keep moving forward. Zrathak's expression darkened, his cool demeanor slipping for just a second. And yet you are a species built on the foundation of war. Your history is soaked in blood, Captain. How can you stand there and say you've won? Alaric took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment where he had to make Zrathak, and everyone in this room, understand. He stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the professor's. You don't get it, do you? Alaric's voice softened, but there was a sharp edge to it. We fought wars because we had no other choice. We fought wars because our survival depended on it. But the real victory was what came after. Every war, every battle, every struggle, it all led to us being here today. We don't just fight to survive, Zrathak. We fight to thrive. And no matter what you think of our past, no matter how you judge us, humanity will never stop moving forward. We'll keep fighting, and we'll keep growing. That's who we are. The room was still. The other delegates were quiet, watching the exchange with a mix of curiosity and intrigue. Zrathak said nothing for a long moment, his eyes narrowed as he studied Alaric. Finally, he spoke, his tone quieter but still carrying the same weight of superiority. Perhaps, he said slowly, there is more to humanity than I have given credit for. He paused, his gaze flicking to the other delegates. But I remain unconvinced that your species is anything more than a collection of survivors. Time will tell if your survival is truly a victory, or simply a delay before your inevitable extinction. Alaric's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't let it show. Time will tell, Professor. But I have no doubt that humanity will endure. And when it does, it will be because we learned from our past, not because we ran from it. Zrathak's eyes gleamed, but his smile remained absent. The tension in the room hung heavy, but the shift was undeniable. Alaric had made his stand, and whether or not Zrathak admitted it, something had changed. The professor could no longer dismiss humanity as a mere byproduct of conflict. They had proven they were something more. The class continued, but Alaric's thoughts lingered on Zrathak's final words. The professor hadn't given in, he never would. But Alaric knew one thing for sure: humanity had won something that no alien in this room could ever truly understand. They had won the fight to be seen as more than just survivors. They had won the fight to define their own future. And no matter how much Zrathak mocked them, no matter how many challenges lay ahead, humanity would keep fighting for that future. The final session on the Challenger was set in an austere, circular room, its walls shimmering with projections of distant galaxies. The air inside felt different today, heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. The delegates from all the species aboard the ship had gathered, their eyes fixed on the figure standing at the center of the room. Alaric Jameson, now feeling the weight of his previous confrontations with Professor Zrathak, stood tall, his military uniform precise, the glint of his war medals catching the light as he prepared for the final lecture. Zrathak stood across from him, his usual composed demeanor betraying a hint of something else, curiosity, perhaps, or even uncertainty. The Grel'zok professor, despite his earlier dismissals of humanity's past, had been watching Alaric closely over the past few days. Something about the human's resilience had caught his attention. But there was no way he would admit it, not openly at least. The room was silent, the hum of the Challenger's engines barely audible over the stillness. Zrathak's voice broke the quiet, smooth and deliberate, but with a tinge of something colder now. Captain Jameson, Zrathak said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of knowledge. You have insisted that survival alone is a victory for your species. You have fought in wars, and you claim that humanity's true strength lies in its ability to rebuild and rise again. But tell me this, why does humanity continue to fight? If survival is the ultimate goal, why is there never peace? Why does the cycle of war never end? Alaric stood, his chest rising with a slow, controlled breath. The question hung in the air, but he had already faced this line of reasoning, had already lived it. His hands gripped the edges of the podium as he spoke, his voice unwavering. You're right, Alaric began, pausing briefly to gather his thoughts. Humanity hasn't known lasting peace. But we don't fight just for survival. We fight for something greater. We fight for our future, for the right to define it on our terms. And that's why we never stop fighting. We don't know how to give up. It's who we are. Zrathak's eyes narrowed, and the tension in the room deepened. So you admit it. Your wars are driven not by necessity, but by your need to assert your place in the galaxy. Your species fights because it cannot accept that there may be peace without victory. Alaric's lips curled into a tight smile. Peace doesn't mean the absence of war, Zrathak. It means the ability to look beyond conflict, to build something from the ashes of destruction. And that's where humanity excels. We don't just survive the worst of times. We transform them into a new beginning. There was a pause as Zrathak processed the words. He didn't speak immediately, choosing instead to let the silence stretch between them, thick with unspoken meaning. Finally, he spoke, his tone now more reflective. Perhaps there is more to humanity than I thought, he said slowly, his gaze fixed on Alaric. But your species' endless struggle, does it not tire you? Does it not weigh on your spirit? Alaric's hand shifted slightly, brushing over the metals pinned to his chest. He thought of the faces of his fallen comrades, the battles fought, the wars won, and the sacrifices made. There had been times when the weight had almost been unbearable. But he had never wavered. Humanity had never wavered. We are tired, Alaric admitted, his voice softer now, though still strong. But we keep going. We fight because we have to. We fight because we know what's at stake. If we stop, everything we've worked for, everything we've fought for, disappears. The peace we seek isn't handed to us. We create it, piece by piece, with every battle, every loss, and every victory. The professor tilted his head, studying Alaric as if trying to peer into the very soul of humanity. He had never encountered a species quite like this. Other species had fought, yes, but none had fought with such relentless determination, with such resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. I suppose I have underestimated you, Zrathak said quietly. But I still do not understand. What is the ultimate purpose of this endless struggle? Alaric met the professor's gaze, his voice steady and resolute. The ultimate purpose, Professor, is not to conquer or destroy. It's to ensure that we never forget who we are, where we came from, and what we're capable of. We fight because we refuse to let the past define us. We fight to build something better, to leave behind a legacy of strength, unity, and survival. That's our victory. The room fell silent once more, the weight of Alaric's words settling on the delegates like a heavy blanket. For a moment, no one spoke. Zrathak stood motionless, his ancient mind processing the human's words. The other delegates exchanged glances, some contemplative, others visibly moved. They had witnessed the resilience of humanity firsthand, and it was undeniable. Zrathak finally broke the silence, his voice softer now. Perhaps, then, victory is not what I thought it was. He paused, his gaze shifting across the room before landing back on Alaric. Perhaps victory is not about triumph over others. Perhaps it is about triumph over oneself. Alaric nodded slowly. Exactly. That's the real victory. The ability to overcome our own limitations, our own failures, and rise above them. That's what makes us who we are. Zrathak's expression shifted slightly, as if something deep within him had finally clicked. He gave a small, reluctant nod, acknowledging the point. You have made your case, Captain Jameson, Zrathak said, his voice tinged with respect. I will not deny that there is more to your species than I previously believed. Perhaps, in time, I will come to understand your definition of victory more fully. Alaric smiled, but it was a quiet, introspective smile. You don't have to understand, Professor. Just remember one thing, humanity's greatest strength lies in our ability to endure. We may never have the most advanced technology, or the strongest armies, but we have something no one can take from us. The will to keep moving forward. As Zrathak turned back to the class, signaling the end of the lecture, Alaric's thoughts drifted back to the wars he had fought in, the battles that had shaped his life. He thought of the faces of those who had fought beside him, who had fallen, and who had helped build the world they now stood in. Humanity's struggle wasn't over. It never would be. But that wasn't a curse, it was a blessing. A testament to the human spirit that would never be broken. As the class began to disperse, Alaric felt the weight of his uniform, of the medals, and of the history they represented. But more than that, he felt the weight of something far greater, the unyielding determination of the human race to forge its own future. And that was a victory no one could ever take away.